Fantastic. Now we'll move right on. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian. It's fantastic to have you on. This is a very interesting one for me, actually. I'm just going to share with you this. I've never actually met Brian. I've heard so much about his work, so much about what he does. So I'm definitely excited, as excited as the viewers, to have this conversation. So to anyone that's watching this live, if you have any questions, towards Brian, just as we did with Cynthia, feel free to comment them and I'll pause my conversation and we'll have Brian answer those questions. So let's get right into it. Welcome, Brian. How are you doing this morning?
I'm fine, Amy. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm so happy to have you on.
It's my pleasure to be here, and really thank you to you and Ed for organizing this platform. It's a really great initiative, and we appreciate.
Thank you. Fantastic. So, I'll get right into it. Please, Brian, tell us about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you got into it.
Uh, with regard to how I got into football, I've always been I was a player. I
Mm-hmm.
still play to a certain extent, but I played quite competitively here in Kenya, and then a bit later in Geneva, Switzerland, where I moved for work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a player, but as
Mm-hmm.
my intro says on the summit page, I'm an IT professional. So I
Mm-hmm.
worked in IT for about 10 years before I started to really question why I was doing what I'm doing and where my career was headed, because I felt like I was just going through the paces of the day. So
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to find something that I was passionate about, first of all, and also where I could create value. So that's why I decided to start getting more into football, because also
Mm-hmm.
my playing days were coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Age was catching up, so I felt like something was being taken away from me, but I didn't want to let it go. So I started by writing, first
Mm-hmm.
of all, just my experiences playing football here in Kenya, here in Europe, some of the things that I observed, the differences between football in Europe and football here in Kenya, and that's just seeing where the gap is. So that's how I started brianwesaala.com, which is
Mm-hmm.
my personal blog where I document a lot of these stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then around 2016, because of certain events in my life, I was deciding I can no longer continue the job I was doing, and then
Mm-hmm.
also other personal changes uh, in my life. I started doing a tournament here in Nairobi called the Obama Cup, tackling unemployment through sport,
Mm-hmm.
because my thinking then was that yeah, football is really popular here in Kenya, here in Africa, but from observation, it wasn't creating the right opportunities for the young people here. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people would spend time in football because of the passion, because of the talents they had, but
Mm-hmm.
they were realizing when it's too late that they cannot make it professionally, and this has resulted in a lot of, if I can say, an antisocial kind of behavior, especially among footballers. So I really started to question that why is this the case? And one of the observations I had was that the football, especially amateur football, was very detached from the corporate society.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, this is something I'm going to change, and I'm going to do it here in Kenya. So that's how I started the tournament, Obama Cup, tackling
Mm-hmm.
unemployment through sport. So initially, it was just as a way of also addressing social exclusion and
Mm-hmm.
ensuring, especially my former teammates who I had kept in touch with, would continue this kind of regular interaction. And then later, I started to bring in the corporate teams as a way of bridging this gap. So I would bring teams from the corporate sector, I'd bring teams from academia, that's universities and colleges, as well as community teams. And mine was to communicate that as much as we are here for a tournament to play, this is a great platform for you to grow your social capital. And
Mm-hmm.
I was really insisting on uh, players, especially amateur players,
Mm-hmm.
trying to use it as a way of networking for their
Yeah.
careers as much as possible. So yeah, that was 2016, 2017. 2017 is when, after seeing the kind of support that I was getting for the tournament, I said, yeah, I think there's something bigger I can do with
Yeah.
this. Yeah, because my tournaments were crowd funded. So I would
Hmm.
basically run a crowdfunding campaign through my blog. And from there, I was able to, they were self-sustaining. I didn't have to dig a lot into my pocket to
Yeah.
support the tournaments. So I felt there was a lot of goodwill for what I was doing, and people were interested in what I was doing as much as they were also interested in the content that I was pushing through my blog. So that's when I
Hmm.
decided to set up the Football Foundation for Africa. And
Hmm.
I remember my initial thoughts when I set up the foundation was I wanted to create a more sustainable football industry in
Hmm.
Africa. And by sustainability, I mean I wanted this sport to create the right opportunities for young people. And I think at some point I talked with Ed on another platform, and he also really
Hmm.
helped me to shape my purpose and thoughts around the Football Foundation for Africa. So yeah, that was 2017. 2018, I launched the foundation. That was in July 2018, and I had an opportunity to go to Botswana and do the same tournament that I was doing here in Nairobi. And in
Hmm.
Botswana, I did it as FFA Cup. And again, there it was well received by the community, the football association there. There was a lot of government and corporate support. So yeah, I also in the same year I left my job in Geneva, Switzerland, where I was working as an IT professional for the UN,
Hmm.
and I also took the opportunities to kind of to bridge my career, if I can say that, because I had researched a lot around football. I'd read a lot around football. I was a player, I was a fan, but I felt I didn't have the right knowledge to realize my vision. So I also took up a professional master in football business just for
Hmm.
1 year before I moved back, which I finished in March last year,
Hmm.
before relocating back to Nairobi to really execute my goals. So
Fantastic.
that's why I'm here today.
Thank you for that, Brian. Thank you for sharing. I just want us to touch on something that you've mentioned a bit earlier in your journey, because I think that could be very useful to the viewers today. And that's more of your transition from IT into sport. I understand that you had that passion, and, it's something that you knew and wanted to do. But can we talk more specifically about what that actually looked like? I mean, you've mentioned it a little, feeling like you don't have enough knowledge. I can relate to that, taking up a professional course. So let's just talk a bit about how you made that transition. What were actually the small things that supported you? What were the challenges you faced, and how you overcame them? And how other people who see themselves in this place where they love sports and they want to get into that industry, but they're currently doing something else, how can they make that transition?
For me, the transition took it took quite a while and a lot of thinking and also consulting, because for me my biggest rather one of my challenges was, yeah, I was living in a foreign country. So
Hmm.
leaving my job meant leaving the country and coming back to Nairobi. That's after 10 years. That already was quite a challenge. And then, of course, there's always issues of finances. You're
Yeah.
leaving a regular salary to go into a very uncertain environment. So that was something else I was thinking about. And like I said, I also had to invest in my knowledge, so I had to pay for the professional
Hmm.
master. But fortunately, I had some savings put aside, which I could use for the same. So it was a very challenging period, but also very revealing of my character to myself, because
Hmm.
up until then I was just yes, I can do it, I am good at it, I'm getting contracts at least regularly or relatively well, but is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? So it also took a bit of looking forward and also talking to those who had been ahead of me. I took the opportunity to talk with very senior colleagues, even within the organization and I was working with, and just trying to find out, like, what's your journey been like, when you look back, what do you think are some of the things you could change, what you could do differently. And yeah, a lot of them just encouraged me, like, you have a purpose, you have something you want to go and work towards, um, go and do it, and you could always come back. Then there's no, it's not like it's a closed door or anything. So I
Mm-hmm.
consulted widely, and just tried to do as much research as possible. Of course, the other
Mm-hmm.
challenge was convincing people that I was actually leaving my IT career to go and do football, because some people
Yeah.
would look at you like, are you really serious? Even the people who are really close to you, they would wonder, are you really serious that you're going to do football? I said, yes, this is something I've seen. I think I can add value in this space as opposed to what
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing currently. So as challenging as it was, there was also a lot of support, or rather a lot of positive feedback from certain quarters. So I
Mm-hmm.
chose to follow the positives, and yeah, took the big leap in March 2019. I moved back to Nairobi, started working from home. Now I have space where I work from, so it's really been quite a journey.
Yeah, fantastic. I see you've mentioned so much about, your character and, your own development in that. So that leads me to what I wanted to ask next, which is, what is one particular skill? I know there's many things that, you've had a long journey, there's a lot that you've endured, but what do you think is a one skill, that's actually enabled you to grow towards, transitioning from IT into football and making an impact there? What's one skill that's actually, supported your self-development?
I have to say resilience,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a skill I didn't know I have it
Mm-hmm.
until much later, and until other people were pointing it at me. Like, I think you're very resilient when it comes to the way you do your things. And remember, the first person who told me about this was my former supervisor when I initially moved out to Geneva for an internship.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I was just talking to him, and he looked at me and said, I think you're a very stubborn person, but in a very good way. It kind of helps you to survive. And he told me
Mm-hmm.
something, I think you get it from football.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the resilience I have is because of my football background. Back then, I didn't think about it much, because, yeah, he told me I was stubborn, which I thought was negative then, though he said you are stubborn in a good way. I didn't have the word
Yeah.
resilience then. But as I continued in Geneva, working in Geneva, being alone in a foreign country, having to look for your own contracts, look for your own ways to survive. Then
Mm-hmm.
somebody else mentioned it to me, dude, you're very resilient. How do you just
Mm-hmm.
manage? And that's when I started to think critically about, yeah, my ability to just go through difficult times, bounce back, and be able to reinvent myself and things like that. And again, I think that helped me a lot during the transition from my IT career to football, because I got to that point where I felt my IT career was not really working for me. And that,
Yeah.
if you look at it from another perspective, is almost like accepting I have failed in this, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really define where I'm going. I need to bounce back from this, and I need to reinvent myself.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. And yeah, I say it's a skill that has helped me for a very long time. And it's only recently that I'm coming to realize, because now, even as I go into the sport for, I say I'm going into the sport for development phase, it's something
Mm-hmm.
that I'm trying to make footballers aware of.
Okay.
Because even when it comes to other careers, there are certain skills that being a sports person, being a footballer, has already, you're predisposed to have
Mm-hmm.
these skills, but we are rarely aware. So it's up
Okay.
to us who are in the space to start communicating to these people. You
Mm-hmm.
actually have certain skills, resilience, teamwork, communication. You have these skills, but you need to translate them, make an intentional connection with your career and what you want to achieve in life. It
Mm-hmm.
could be in football, but also it could be in a career outside football.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, resilience is that skill that I really think I have. and
Mm-hmm.
also I need to feed it more, because for you to be
Okay.
resilient, like I said, you also need to look for help whenever you feel like you need assistance. Always be able to understand that I'm in a position where things are not going so well, so I need advice, I need help from certain
Yeah.
people, and feel free to reach out. That helps you to build on your resilience. And even at a time like this, with the current situation with the pandemic, I think what will get a lot of people to the other side of this is resilience. Because look at what is happening in the sports industry now. A lot of these players are not able to play, and maybe most of them also don't have a second career. How do they
Yeah.
survive during this period? I think it's a lot of it will boil down to resilience.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I think you've mentioned such brilliant points. And actually, something I want to reiterate, which I've also just learned from you, is the fact that sometimes you have these skills, but you don't actually know that you have them. So it's very important to be communicating with people who work closely with you or play sports closely with you in order to understand skills that you may have that you don't know. So I just want to shift that a little bit and still
Very
talk
true.
about resilience, Brian. I just want to ask about how, in terms of actually having this skill, put as someone who's viewing this as a young person in a tough position, how can they actually learn to be more resilient? How can they handle their emotions? How can they handle the whole perspective of everything, and use this skill of resilience to get themselves out of a negative situation?
I think for a lot of young people, um, I try to communicate the issue of being self-aware. I think it's very important to
Mm-hmm.
be aware of your strengths, to be aware of your weaknesses, and always seeking to improve on the same. Life as it is, our careers, our social life, there's a lot of ups and downs. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to take from your experience. Was not all of us, for example, here, I'm not speaking from a position of authority, because probably I don't have the training in psychology or whatever field that's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the experiences we go through in life, we should always look to learn from them, be it the good experiences or the bad experiences. After celebration, you should always think, so what did I do right in that situation? And
Mm-hmm.
after a bad patch, you can always ask yourself again, what did I do right in that situation, or what did I do wrong in that situation that I'm coming out from? I think
Mm-hmm.
that builds a lot on your self awareness, and helps you to grow going forward. So at the moment, even I have a lot of young people, not very young, so coming after me, and they're asking me a lot about my experience, because they're
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Hey, bro, you're coming from the UN now. You're pretty much struggling to set up this football foundation for Africa. It's only been 2 years, actually 1 year full time.
Mm-hmm.
How are you managing?" And I always tell people of my experience, like this is what I've gone through. But for you,
Mm-hmm.
it might be different. So you need to be very aware of that. So as much as they can learn from my experience, it's important for them to build their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a very I think it also boils down to a lot of research. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do much harm to even research about your own reactions or your own behavior towards things. It's always good to take a step back or take a step out and look at yourself and how you have conducted yourself in certain
Mm-hmm.
situations, and go and find information. Nowadays there's a lot of information out there that can go and research on. There's books out there that you can go and research on. Again, there's people you can always consult, some of them who are much qualified than maybe you are. So again, it boils down to information and knowledge. Always seek to know more about yourself, about others. And yeah, this is how I have chosen to look at things.
Fantastic. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, in relating to today's summit, today is the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace. Now, in your opinion, how important, is sports development and peace? You've worked in Kenya, you've worked in Geneva, so generally on a global scale, what is the importance, of sports development and peace?
Yes, so when I think I tend to focus on the sport for development. Sometimes I leave the piece bit out there, though I connect it much later because I believe this is a space I am working on. I think sport has the capacity uh, to build on our strengths as individuals and
Mm-hmm.
also as communities.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like we were talking about resilience earlier and saying these are skills that are inherent in sports people. But how are we using that to develop? And this is one of the things I set up when I did. Actually, I did my strategy for rather the concept note for the Football Foundation for Africa, and then I just recently uh, tried to revise that. So
Mm-hmm.
the initial one was based on three pillars, and the first one was education, and the
Mm-hmm.
second was infrastructure, and thirdly it was governance.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at education initially. Even these skills that we inherently possess, it takes a measure of education for us to come to understand that we actually have these great skills as sports people that we
Mm-hmm.
can use not only to better ourselves, but also to be more productive in societies, to be more involved in the communities that we belong to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I relate sports in this issue of sport for peace and development. Then recently, I've had the opportunity to again relook my strategy, or rather than my concept of the Football Foundation for Africa, and I chose to work with a subset of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So at the base of this is education and health, and that's really at an individual level. For us to go
Mm-hmm.
forward, I think it's important that players are empowered through education and also protected by enhancing their health. And naturally, this translates to the communities in which they belong to. I believe sports people should be great ambassadors in their communities, and if they're educated, if they're empowered, then they're in a better position to play this ambassadorial role that they have. Because
Mm-hmm.
the other thing I realized, people will always look up to sports people, but
Mm-hmm.
in some circumstances they don't really provide that guidance, or they don't live up to the responsibility that is being ascribed to them. So how do we change this? For me, it's through empowerment. The education and health is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And then to support this, I said, yes, we can empower players through education. You can protect them through encouraging them to be healthy, both physically and mentally. Sports already give them a measure of physical health, but we need to create the right opportunities for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a second level, I had the SDG on employment, and then on infrastructure development, because there's something on innovation industry and infrastructure. I think a lot of the times when we listen to these conversations about infrastructure, for example, they rarely talk about sports infrastructure. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about sports development, but we're not talking about sports infrastructure development, for example. But I
Mm-hmm.
think this will really be key, especially in the development of communities in Africa or in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
There's really a huge gap when it comes to sports infrastructure. And if we are talking about developing this industry for it to create the right opportunities for people, then we also have to create the right infrastructure. When I talk about employment, there's employment in sports and outside sports.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, what I was doing with my tournament, because most of these are amateur players, and we have to also accept a bulk of the players we have in Kenya, a bulk of the players we have in Africa are amateur players.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not being paid professionally. They most definitely need a second career, which I think is very doable. You can play competitive sports and still have a second career.
Mm-hmm.
So after we have educated them and empowered them, then you need to connect them to opportunities. And that's one of the reasons why the tournaments I was organizing, I was trying to see how best can I bring corporates
Mm-hmm.
closer to the
Yeah.
amateur football, because you also realize the kind of relationship sports has had with the corporate sector for a long time. is kind of detached. So as
Mm-hmm.
much as they could sponsor your event and they could have their logos, their banners, they don't really identify with what you're doing. So there's a lack of authenticity when it comes to sponsorship. So that's one other thing that I'm trying to change. When you come to sponsor my tournament, for example, I also want you to identify with what we are trying to achieve through sports,
Mm-hmm.
which is to create employment or create opportunities for our participants. And then lastly, at the base, now to support all this, there's a lot of conversation around climate change at the
Mm-hmm.
moment. So I think this is a conversation, it's relatively new, but Africa has the chance to be part of this conversation at a
Mm-hmm.
very early stage. And we don't have to like have the big projects and all that. Even in our own small settings, how are we ensuring the sustainability, or rather the environmental sustainability of the things we do? The
Mm-hmm.
events we organize, how are we incorporating environmental sustainability in what we do? So a lot of this is also being done. I'm trying to look for the right partnerships to implement, because I tell people, as the Football Foundation for Africa, the only thing I know is football.
Yeah.
So I need to create the right partnerships to help
Mhm.
me achieve rather to realize my vision, which is for a sustainable football industry in Africa.
Brian, I love your perspective. I love how whole-rounded it is. I love how, you can see it's very obvious that you worked at the UN with how you integrate everything, the SDGs and, everything to do with development in different sectors. So I 100% love your perspective. And I really hope the viewers enjoyed this. So I think actually right now we have a question from one of the viewers. And it's obviously to you, Brian, and it's right on the screen. So it says, just how hard is it to find sponsorship and partnerships for sports, especially in Kenya? Is it a dead end, or what are teams not doing right? Why are our teams struggling to find sponsors?
I have partly touched on that, and I think that's one of the things that I set out to address. Thank you very much for the question. I think it's very important. If you look at, for example, we can talk about the Kenya Premier League now, which is supposed to be at the professional level, and a lot of the teams are struggling to find sponsors. And second tier as well, a lot of these people are struggling to find sponsors. So it's kind of, I think it's not sustainable the way we are running things. A lot needs to change at the level of the teams in terms of packaging themselves into products that actually companies would want to associate with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a dead end. We have to really um, go back to the drawing board and see what has changed. For example, you see, previously, before we had social media, maybe sports was one of the few avenues in which brands could get their names out there. How would they grow their brand equity? Sports was one of those places in that they could invest in. But now we have social media, through
Mm-hmm.
which brands are able to communicate with potential customers, potential partners. So sports is not necessarily an avenue they'd want to use. And then you think about, and so let's say like industries, for example, in Africa, there's also a lot of reputational risk that is associated with sponsoring some
Yeah.
of our teams, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Corporates will shy away from that space, and this is football specifically. Despite it being the most popular sport in the country, sponsors will shy away from that space because of the reputational risk that is associated with the game. And this goes even to the global platform. So it's not only in Kenya or in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
even at the World Cup levels, they're
Yeah.
recently struggling to fill all the 8 spots that they have for partners and sponsors. So something has to change at that level. And like I said previously, when I was crafting the concept note for the Football Foundation for Africa, one of the key pillars was governance. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really high time we looked at the governance structures of the global game to see where really the problems are. because you see some of the things that are happening, they're basically events and patterns that reflect on an underlying structure. So we need to change some of these things. But in the short term, it's trying to sell a different value proposition. For example, what I've been trying to do with my tournaments to get sponsors, and I'm still not getting sponsors, at least to the level I expect. I organize workshops that are aimed towards addressing youth employability prior to the tournament, to which I invite players. I think Amy have also done something similar
Yes. Yes.
with the workshops. And this is what I'm trying to sell to corporates. Like, look here, we are not just doing football. We're also doing these workshops to help young people in other aspects of their life. And then you also get the benefit of enjoying um, the platform that the event gives you. So you
Yeah.
see that you have that. It's kind of, I think it's a changed business model. You're not just coming to sponsor a tournament. You also have this whole week of workshops
Yeah.
that we are working on. So we need to be more creative, more innovative when approaching sponsors. It's no longer just going to say, "Hey, look here, I have a football tournament. Hey, look here, I have a Premier League team. Can you please sponsor us?" How are you creating value as
Yeah.
a team? Because events are basically a platform. And at the same time, we need to challenge these sponsors. Like, if you want to come on board on my platform, you also need to come with a value proposition so that we meet halfway.
Yeah.
Because traditionally, we just go and ask for sponsorship, basically asking for money. If they want you to leave, they probably give you something. Okay, here is money for your tournament. We leave it at that. But that is not working very well now. It needs to be a more authentic relationship. I think I mentioned this earlier. It needs to be a very a long-term engagement between the sports, the rights holders and the sponsors. So yeah, we need to be more innovative, more creative,
Yeah.
put our houses in order by advocating for better governance of our sports so that we can again regain that interest from the corporate sector. And that's
Fantastic.
the work we have at the moment.
I hope that answered the question. I think that was a brilliant response. So I hope you've seen that into perspective, Brian. I'm sure there's going to be more questions coming your way. After sharing your perspective today. So can you please let viewers know how they can interact with you? Do you want them to reach out to you on social media, on email, LinkedIn? Please share with them how they can reach you.
I think a lot of what I do for football is on Facebook. So on Facebook, you can find me as Brian Wesaala, but I also encourage people to check out the Football Foundation for Africa page, and yeah, because that's where I'm trying to shift to a lot of my content and ideas. So feel free to reach out to me on either of these platforms. On LinkedIn as well, I'm Brian Wesaala. I think it's been a lovely tool for all of us. Like Amy, the moment one of the things I did when I was trying to get into the football industry, for example, was to find the right connections. And I think you're one of the people I connected to on
Yes.
LinkedIn, working in the same space. And so that has been very, very helpful. So if you want to connect professionally, my LinkedIn is also Brian Wesaala. I'm also Brian Wesaala on Twitter. So feel free to reach out to me on any of these platforms.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. To the viewers, there you have it from Brian. You can reach out to him on any of the social platforms. Aside from that, please share your biggest takeaway from Brian. You can leave a comment right here on Facebook, what you learned from him. You can also head over to Twitter. Our hashtag for the day is hashtag Spirit of Sport. So you can share that, use the hashtag Spirit of Sport, and just share your takeaway. Share what you learned from Brian, how he's inspired you. And as you know, if you have a question, feel free to reach out to him. Thank you so, so, so much for joining us, Brian. I love your perspective and I look forward to connecting with you further beyond today.
Thank you very much, Amy. Looking forward to connecting as well.